Hi, I'm Lauren, and you're watching a CS 1331 YouTube help video. Today's topic is good code versus working code. So before we get into some examples of how to make working code into good code, let's kind of get into why we're talking about good code versus working code. What actually is the difference between good code versus working code? They both function the exact same way. They'll return the exact same output. The reason that we emphasize good code is because good code has much more readability. So that's readability for your future self, especially when you're starting to have to debug your code when it doesn't work properly. But also when you start working with group members, it makes it much easier for your teammates to be able to read through your code and understand what you're doing so that they can code their own parts. So now let's look at our first example of how to make working code into good code. We have this class here called bad style. So let's go ahead and run that and see what our output is. So our output is 1023. And the reason for that is because it's summing 2 to the power of 0 all the way up to 2 to the power of 9. So why is this bad code? To begin with, we have everything in our main method. Good code has each method having a very specific function. And the reason for that is you don't have to repeat your code very often. So you can see here from lines 13 all the way up to line 4, we're writing the exact same thing. But in addition, it makes it a little bit easier to see where problems start coming when you have debugging. If you know that you're not getting the correct summation or the correct power, then you know exactly which method to go to. So let's go ahead and make a quick method. So I'm going to call it sum powers. And notice that I'm using a method name that describes the function or purpose of my method. In this case, it's going to be summing my powers. I'm going to be taking in two parameters, the int base, which in this case would be 2, and int max power, which in this case would be 9. It's the maximum power that I want to take of the base. And so I'm going to have some sort of variable, which in this case was x, as that was our final answer here. And that's going to start off as 0, and that'll be what we're adding to. I'm then going to create a for loop, so for int I equals 0, while I is less than or equal to max power, I plus plus. And then in our for loop, we're going to be adding uncat int math dot pow to I. And then we'll end up returning x. And so we'll go up here, and instead of saying all of this code up here, we can change it to just be systemout.print sum powers to 9. And if we run that, we can see that it'll give us the exact same output of 1023. So do you see how much shorter this makes our code, how much easier it is to read? But this is still not quite good code, and the reason for that is we have these variable names, x, but that doesn't really tell us the function of x. If we were ever to come back to this months from now and trying to debug or change or add things to some powers, we may not understand what the purpose of x is. And so it's really helpful if we make variable names that actually explain the use of them. So I'm going to be calling x sum instead of just x. This is telling me that it's the actual summation of all of our math powers. And just as another note, I didn't explicitly say this as I was coding, but it's important to note the spacing that I used in between every equal sign, every assignment, every time I put in parameters. That's really important because when we use things like this, where we have nothing spaced out properly, it makes it very difficult to read, very difficult to understand what everything's doing, which is why it's super important to actually be spacing things out. You can see that this is much more difficult to read rather than when we had spaces between everything here. Thanks for watching the first good code versus working code. If you're interested in looking more at comparing good code versus working code, then hop on over to our second video. If you have any questions or comments, then feel free to post that in our Piazza.